Imagine a kingdom on the brink of collapse, where fierce debates over power, faith, and governance split the nation in two. England in the early 17th century was a battleground not just for armies, but for the very soul of the country. King Charles I, steadfast in his belief in divine right, clashed with a parliament determined to curb royal authority. Religious tensions between Protestants and perceived Catholic influences fueled the fire. The English Civil War, a brutal and transformative conflict, tore families, communities, and kingdoms apart. Join us at the War Vault as we uncover the turbulent origins of this epic struggle that reshaped England's future. In the early 1600s, England was a kingdom grappling with profound divisions that cut across political, religious, and social lines. The ascension of King Charles I to the throne in 1625 marked the beginning of a reign that would plunge the nation into chaos. Charles, a reserved and deeply religious monarch, was an unwavering believer in the divine right of kings, the doctrine that monarchs derived their authority directly from God and were accountable only to him. This conviction put him at odds with a parliament increasingly assertive about its role in governance, particularly its control over taxation and legislation. The resulting tensions set the stage for one of the most consequential conflicts in English history, the English Civil War, 1651. Charles' reign was marked by immediate challenges. His predecessor, James VI, had already strained relations with Parliament through his own belief in absolute monarchy, but Charles took this ideology to new heights. His pressing need for funds to support wars, particularly against Spain and France in the late 1620s, clashed with Parliament's insistence on approving taxes and addressing grievances before granting funds. When Parliament refused to comply without concessions, Charles dissolved it multiple times, most notably in 1629, embarking on an 11-year period known as the Personal Rule or the 11 Years' Tyranny. During this time, he governed without parliamentary input, relying on prerogative powers to raise revenue and enforce policies. The Personal Rule deepened the divide between the crown and its subjects. Without Parliament, Charles resorted to controversial financial measures, such as ship money, a tax traditionally levied on coastal towns to fund naval defense, but extended inland during peacetime. This move, perceived as illegal by many, infuriated the gentry, merchants, and emerging middle class who valued the rule of law and their traditional rights. Figures like John Hampden, a prominent landowner, publicly challenged ship money in court, galvanizing opposition and highlighting Charles's overreach. The king's reliance on other prerogative taxes, such as forced loans and the sale of monopolies, further eroded trust, painting him as a ruler who prioritized royal privilege over the welfare of his people. Religion was an equally potent source of division. England was a Protestant nation, having broken with the Catholic Church during the Reformation under Henry VIII. However, by the early 17th century, religious tensions simmered between those who embraced the established Church of England and the growing Puritan movement, which sought to purify the Church of practices they viewed as Catholic remnants. Charles's marriage to Henrietta Maria, a Catholic French princess, in 1625 sparked widespread unease as many feared a Catholic resurgence. These fears were amplified by Charles's support for Archbishop William Laud, whose high church reforms emphasized elaborate rituals, ornate church decorations, and centralized ecclesiastical authority. To Puritans, these policies smacked of popery, raising alarms that Charles was undermining Protestantism and steering England back toward Catholicism. Laud's reforms, including the enforcement of the Book of Common Prayer and the suppression of Puritan preaching, alienated a broad swath of society. Puritans, ranging from moderate reformers to radical dissenters, grew increasingly vocal, viewing themselves as defenders of true Protestantism against a corrupt church and monarchy. Their influence was particularly strong among the gentry, merchants, and urban communities, who saw religious liberty as intertwined with political freedom. The religious divide thus became a rallying cry, fueling opposition to Charles's rule and deepening the rift between crown and subjects. Beyond England's borders, crises in Scotland and Ireland further destabilized Charles's reign. In 1637, Charles and Laud attempted to impose the Book of Common Prayer on Scotland, a staunchly Presbyterian nation. The move provoked the Bishops' Wars, as Scots, united under the National Covenant, resisted what they saw as an assault on their faith. The First Bishops' War, 1639, ended in a humiliating stalemate for Charles, who lacked the funds and military strength to subdue the Scots. This failure forced him to recall Parliament in 1640, ending the personal rule. The short Parliament, convened in April 1640, lasted only 3 weeks, as Charles dissolved it when members demanded reforms in exchange for funds. However, the ongoing Scottish crisis and financial desperation compelled him to summon the Long Parliament in November 1640. Led by figures like John Pym, a skilled orator and strategist, the Long Parliament took a bold stance, passing laws to curb royal power. The Triennial Act of 1641 mandated that Parliament meet at least every 3 years, ensuring it could not be sidelined again. The abolition of the Star Chamber, a secretive royal court used to punish dissenters, and the Court of High Commission, which enforced religious conformity, further limited Charles's authority. These reforms signaled a growing parliamentary resolve to assert its role as a co-equal partner in governance. The Long Parliament's actions were not merely defensive, they challenged the very nature of monarchical power. Pym and his allies demanded accountability, arguing that the king's advisers, particularly Laud and Thomas Wentworth, Earl of Strafford, had misled Charles. Strafford, a key architect of the personal rule and governor of Ireland, was impeached and executed in 1641. A stark warning to the king. Laud was imprisoned, further inflaming tensions. These events emboldened Parliament, but also hardened Charles's resolve to defend his prerogatives. The situation escalated with rebellions in Ireland. In 1641, the Irish Rebellion erupted, driven by Catholic grievances against Protestant settlers and English rule. The uprising, marked by massacres of Protestants, fueled English fears of a Catholic conspiracy and heightened distrust of Charles given his wife's faith and perceived leniency toward Catholics. The need to raise an army to suppress the rebellion raised a critical question. Who would control the military? Parliament, wary of Charles's intentions, refused to grant him unchecked authority over an army, fearing he might use it against his own people. The breaking point came in January 1642, when Charles committed an unprecedented act. He entered the House of Commons with armed guards to arrest 5 members, including Pym, for treason. This violation of parliamentary privilege shocked the nation, galvanizing opposition and shattering any remaining trust. Charles fled London, which became a parliamentarian stronghold, and both sides began raising armies. By August 1642, England was divided into 2 factions: the Royalists, or Cavaliers, who supported Charles's traditional monarchy, and the Parliamentarians, or Roundheads, who sought to limit royal power and protect parliamentary rights. The English Civil War had begun, a conflict that pitted loyalty against rebellion, tradition against reform, and faith against fear. The nation was torn, with families and communities divided by allegiance. The war's roots lay in a potent mix of political overreach, religious discord, and social change, as England grappled with questions of governance and identity that would resonate for centuries. War and division, major battles, and political turmoil. By 1642, the simmering tensions between King Charles I and Parliament erupted into open warfare, plunging England into the chaos of the First English Civil War, 1642-1646. The nation was torn apart as Royalist forces, loyal to the king's vision of absolute monarchy, clashed with parliamentarian armies determined to curb royal power and assert parliamentary authority. This conflict was not merely a struggle over governance, but a profound battle over England's political, religious, and social future, dividing families, communities, and regions in a brutal contest that would reshape the nation. The war's opening moments were marked by uncertainty and improvisation. Neither side possessed a standing army, and both scrambled to raise forces, secure resources, and rally support. England became a patchwork of allegiances, with some regions and noble families backing Charles V, while others aligned with Parliament. The Royalists, or Cavaliers, drew support from the aristocracy, rural gentry, and those loyal to the traditional monarchy and Anglican Church. Known for their flamboyant style and long hair, they championed the divine right of kings and a hierarchical society. The Parliamentarians, dubbed Roundheads for their short-cropped hair, were primarily urban merchants, Puritans, and members of the gentry who sought political and religious reform, advocating for the rule of law and parliamentary sovereignty. These divisions cut across social classes, creating a deeply polarized nation. The first major engagement, the Battle of Edgehill, fought on October 23, 1642 in Warwickshire, set the tone for the war's brutality. Approximately 26,000 men clashed in a chaotic and bloody encounter. The Royalist army, led by Charles I and his nephew Prince Rupert, a dashing cavalry commander, faced a parliamentarian force under Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex. The battle was fierce but inconclusive, with both sides suffering heavy casualties, around 1,500 dead and thousands wounded. Neither side gained a decisive advantage, but Edgehill revealed the war's potential for prolonged bloodshed, as neither Charles nor Parliament was willing to compromise. The years that followed saw the conflict intensify, fought not only on battlefields but through propaganda, religious sermons, and local skirmishes. Both sides used pamphlets and broadsheets to sway public opinion, with Royalists portraying parliamentarians as rebels against God's anointed king, and Roundheads depicting Charles as a tyrant, threatening English liberties. Sermons, particularly among Puritan communities, framed the war as a divine struggle, with parliamentarians casting themselves as defenders of a godly nation against Catholic influences. These ideological battles deepened the divide, as each side believed it fought for a higher cause. The Royalists for tradition and monarchy, the Parliamentarians for liberty and reform. A pivotal moment came at the Battle of Marston Moor on July 10, 1644, near York, one of the largest battles of the war. Parliamentarian forces, bolstered by their Scottish allies under the Covenanters, Presbyterians who had joined the war to protect their religious freedoms, faced a Royalist army led by Prince Rupert. The battle involved over 40,000 men and was fought in a torrential downpour. The Parliamentarian victory, driven by the disciplined cavalry of Oliver Cromwell, a rising Puritan commander, was decisive. The Royalists lost control of northern England, a critical blow to Charles's campaign, as York, a key stronghold, fell to Parliament. Marston Moor shifted momentum toward the Parliamentarians and showcased Cromwell's emerging military prowess. Cromwell, a Cambridgeshire gentleman and devout Puritan, became a central figure in the Parliamentarian cause. His leadership of the Ironsides, a highly disciplined cavalry unit, demonstrated his tactical skill and ideological fervour. Cromwell's belief in divine providence and his commitment to a reformed, godly England made him a formidable leader, inspiring loyalty among his troops. His success at Marston Moor highlighted the need for a more professional military force, as the Parliamentarian armies had often been hampered by poor coordination and inexperienced commanders. In response, Parliament reorganized its forces in 1645, creating the new model army under the command of Sir Thomas Fairfax, with Cromwell as a key lieutenant. Unlike earlier militias, the new model army was a meritocratic, well-trained, and ideologically driven force, funded by parliamentary taxes and composed of soldiers motivated by Puritan zeal and a commitment to reform. Its creation marked a turning point, professionalizing Parliament's military efforts and giving it a decisive edge over the Royalists. The Battle of Naseby on June 14, 1645, in Northamptonshire, was a crushing defeat for the Royalists and a defining moment in the war. The new model army, numbering around 14,000 men, faced a smaller Royalist force of about 8,000 under Charles and Prince Rupert. Cromwell's cavalry and Fairfax's infantry overwhelmed the Royalists, killing or capturing nearly half their army. The capture of Charles's personal correspondence revealed his attempts to secure Catholic support from Ireland and abroad, alienating even moderate Royalists and undermining his legitimacy. Naseby effectively shattered the Royalists' ability to wage a sustained campaign, paving the way for Parliament's eventual victory. Religion remained a central force throughout the war, shaping both strategy and morale. The Parliamentarians, many of whom were Puritans, sought to reform the Church of England, eliminating what they saw as Catholic vestiges and establishing a more austere, scripture-based faith. The Royalists, aligned with the Anglican Church, defended the traditional ecclesiastical hierarchy and the Book of Common Prayer. These religious divides fueled the war's intensity, as both sides viewed their cause as divinely ordained. The Scottish Covenanters, allied with Parliament, further complicated the religious landscape, advocating for Presbyterianism, which created tensions with English Puritans who favored a more decentralized church structure. Within Parliament, political divisions began to emerge. Moderate members, often Presbyterians, hoped for a negotiated settlement with Charles to preserve a limited monarchy. More radical factions, including independents like Cromwell, pushed for sweeping reforms, including greater religious freedoms and a restructured government. These internal rifts foreshadowed future conflicts, as the question of what would replace the monarchy, if anything, remained unresolved. By 1646, the Royalist cause was in tatters. Charles I surrendered to the Scots in May, hoping to exploit divisions among his enemies, but was soon handed over to Parliament. The First Civil War ended with the defeat of the last Royalist strongholds, such as Oxford. But the nation remained fractured. The victory raised new questions about England's future. Would the monarchy be restored with limits, or would a new form of government emerge? The army, particularly the new model army, began to assert its own political influence, with soldiers demanding pay and a voice in the nation's governance. The war's impact on society was profound. Families were divided, with brothers and neighbors fighting on opposing sides. The countryside suffered as armies requisitioned supplies, and towns like Bristol and Newark endured sieges. The war's economic toll, taxation, disrupted trade, and destruction further strained a weary population. Yet, the conflict also spurred ideological debates about liberty, governance, and religion that would shape England's future. As the First Civil War ended, England stood at a crossroads. The defeat of Charles I did not resolve the underlying tensions, and new conflicts loomed over the shape of the post-war government. The stage was set for further upheaval as radical voices within the army and parliament began to challenge the established order. The aftermath: trial, execution, and the Commonwealth. The surrender of King Charles I in 1646, marking the end of the First English Civil War, did not usher in peace, but rather plunged England into a maelstrom of political uncertainty and ideological strife. The nation stood at a crossroads, grappling with fundamental questions about governance, authority, and the role of the monarchy. The English Civil War had exposed deep divisions between Royalists and Parliamentarians, Anglicans and Puritans, traditionalists and reformers, leaving England fractured and its future uncertain. The defeat of Charles I only intensified the debate. How should the nation be governed? And could a king who believed in divine right coexist with a parliament demanding accountability? Charles IX, held captive by the Parliamentarians and later the Scots, remained defiant. He refused to accept reforms that would limit his powers, such as a constitutional monarchy with parliamentary oversight. Instead, he sought to exploit divisions among his captors, negotiating secretly with the Scots, Irish Catholics, and disaffected parliamentarians to regain his throne. In 1647, he signed the engagement with the Scots, promising to establish Presbyterianism in England in exchange for military support. This sparked the Second English Civil War in 1648, a series of Royalist uprisings and Scottish invasions that was swiftly crushed by the New Model Army led by Oliver Cromwell and Sir Thomas Fairfax. Charles's duplicity deepened mistrust, convincing many parliamentarians that compromise was impossible. The New Model Army, a disciplined and ideologically driven force, emerged as a powerful political entity. Composed largely of Puritans and radicals, the army demanded not only victory but also justice for the war's bloodshed. Frustrated by Charles's intransigence and Parliament's hesitation to act decisively, radical army leaders and their allies in the Long Parliament took bold action. In December 1648, Colonel Thomas Pride led the Pride's Purge, expelling moderate MPs who favoured negotiation with the king. The resulting Rump Parliament, dominated by radicals, paved the way for a revolutionary step: the trial of Charles I. In January 1649, Charles I was put on trial for high treason and tyranny, an unprecedented act in European history. The trial, held in Westminster Hall, challenged the sacred principle of the divine right of kings, asserting that a monarch could be held accountable to the law. The High Court of Justice, established by the Rump Parliament, accused Charles of waging war against his own people and subverting their liberties. Charles refused to recognize the court's legitimacy, arguing that no earthly authority could judge a king anointed by God. His dignified defiance won him some sympathy, but the court, led by figures like John Bradshaw, found him guilty. On January 30, 1649, Charles I was beheaded outside the banqueting house in Whitehall, London. His calm acceptance of death, proclaiming himself a martyr of the people, shocked the nation and reverberated across Europe, where monarchs recoiled at the execution of a fellow king. The execution of Charles I was a seismic event, shattering the traditional order and signaling that no ruler was above the law. In March 1649, the Rump Parliament abolished the monarchy and the House of Lords, declaring England a Commonwealth, a republic governed by the people through their elected representatives. In practice, the Commonwealth was dominated by the Rump Parliament and the New Model Army, with Oliver Cromwell emerging as its leading figure. A devout Puritan and brilliant military commander, Cromwell's vision of a godly nation guided his policies, but his pragmatic leadership often clashed with the diverse factions within the Commonwealth. Cromwell faced immense challenges in stabilizing a war-torn and divided nation. Royalist resistance persisted, particularly in Ireland and Scotland, where Charles I's son, Charles Stuart, later Charles II, was proclaimed king by Loyalists. In 1649, Cromwell led a brutal campaign in Ireland to suppress Catholic and Royalist uprisings, marked by the infamous sieges of Drogheda and Wexford, where thousands were massacred. The campaign, driven by anti-Catholic sentiment and strategic necessity, left a legacy of bitterness that lingers in Anglo-Irish relations. In 1651, Cromwell defeated Scottish forces at the battles of Dunbar and Worcester, crushing Charles II's hopes and securing the Commonwealth's reliance on military force to maintain control. In 1653, after growing dissatisfaction with the Rump Parliament's ineffectiveness, Cromwell dissolved it and assumed the title of Lord Protector under the instrument of government, England's first written constitution. As Lord Protector, Cromwell wielded near-monarchical powers, ruling with a Council of State and a reformed parliament. His regime implemented Puritan reforms, including stricter moral codes, Sabbath observance, and the suppression of Catholic and Anglican practices. The Commonwealth promoted religious tolerance for Protestant sects, but Catholics and nonconformists faced restrictions. Cromwell also pursued ambitious foreign policies, strengthening England's navy and securing victories against the Dutch in the First Anglo-Dutch War, 1652-1654, enhancing England's maritime power. Despite these achievements, Cromwell's rule was marked by contradictions. His commitment to a godly republic clashed with his authoritarian methods, alienating both radicals who sought greater democracy and conservatives who longed for the monarchy's return. The Commonwealth struggled with financial instability as war debts and military costs strained the economy. Cromwell's death in 1658 left a void, and his son, Richard Cromwell, lacked the authority to maintain control. By 1659, the Commonwealth unraveled, with factionalism and economic chaos fueling calls for stability. In 1660, General George Monk, a former parliamentarian commander, orchestrated the restoration of the monarchy, inviting Charles II to return as king. Charles II's coronation in 1661 marked the end of the Commonwealth experiment, but the restoration did not erase the Civil War's legacy. The monarchy was restored with limits, as Parliament retained significant powers, including control over taxation and legislation, laying the groundwork for a constitutional monarchy. The English Civil War profoundly transformed England's political landscape. It challenged the divine right of kings, establishing the principle that rulers could be held accountable by their subjects. The trial and execution of Charles I sent a powerful message about the limits of power, influencing political thought in England and beyond. The Commonwealth, though short-lived, introduced ideas of republicanism and popular sovereignty, inspiring later revolutions, including the American and French revolutions. The war also deepened religious divides, with Puritanism leaving a lasting cultural imprint even as the Restoration revived Anglican dominance. Socially, the war reshaped England's class dynamics. The gentry and merchant classes, key supporters of Parliament, gained influence, contributing to the growth of a commercial economy. The new model army's radical voices, including groups like the Levellers, who advocated for universal male suffrage, and the Diggers, who championed communal land ownership, introduced ideas of equality that resonated in later democratic movements. However, the war's human cost was immense. Approximately 100,000 deaths, countless injuries, and widespread destruction left scars on communities across England, Scotland, and Ireland. The English Civil War's echoes are felt in modern constitutional monarchies and democracies worldwide. It marked a turning point in the struggle for parliamentary authority, individual rights, and the rule of law, shaping the principles that underpin democratic governance today. The conflict's legacy reminds us that revolutions, while costly, can redefine a nation's identity and trajectory. Thank you for joining us at the War Vault for this deep dive into the English Civil War, a pivotal chapter in history that challenged monarchy and forged new paths for democracy. If you enjoyed exploring this saga of rebellion, execution, and transformation, please like, share, and subscribe for more captivating stories from the past. Stay tuned as we continue to unlock history's greatest conflicts, revealing their lasting impact on our world.